Hello, fellow risk takers, and welcome to my worst investment ever. Stories of loss to keep you winning. In our community, we know that to win in investing, you must take risks, but to win big, you've got to reduce it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm on a mission to help 1 million people reduce risk in their lives. And I want to thank my listeners in Sydney, Australia, for joining that mission today. Fellow risk takers, this is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stotts from A Stotts Academy, and I'm here with featured guest Justus Hammer. Justus, are you ready to join the mission?
Let's do it.
All right. Let me introduce you to the audience. Justus is the group CEO and co-founder of Paws. He has invested in over 45 startups over the past 2 years, serving as an advisor and early investor to Airtasker and a founding investor and advisor to Vice Golf. He has not only been involved in starting more than 10 companies in the tech space like Spreets and Paws, but has also developed a growing interest in cash flow businesses over the past 10 years. Justus, take a minute and tell us about the unique value that you are bringing to this wonderful world.
Well, thanks for having me, Andrew. So yeah, I mean, I've come from Germany to Australia, and I've been in Australia now for the last 18 years, I think, nearly. And I think I've been quite lucky that I've been involved in the startup space for a long period of time. I've actually started in Germany, working in a startup there, and kind of got the bug a little bit. Very unusual, I think, history from a startup perspective. I wasn't selling orange juice out of my front yard when I was young. I was a basketball player. Actually, played professional basketball for a little while, and but I think what I did was like I took that kind of the determination that you need in terms of sports, and took that into business. And I think that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 20 years. Started a couple of businesses, some successful, some not, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of those. But I think what I really enjoy is kind of working with early stage startups. I've got a lot of experience in kind of some of the things you can do and can't do, and I think the only thing I can help people with is trying to avoid a couple of the mistakes that I make along the way, to smoothen out the process. That doesn't give you any guarantee that it's going to work, but like you said, we can probably reduce the risk slightly to get you to success.
It's interesting. When you said about basketball, then it started making me think, okay, let's go to boxing. So boxing, it's one person is allowed in the ring against you. And now they happen to have risen up to be the best in that class to challenge you, let's say, or you're challenging another, but you're playing against one person. Now, basketball, okay, it's one team against another. So technically, you could say that you are playing against all the other people in that team, but they're only allowed, a certain number of players to come on that basketball. What is a basketball? It's not a field. What is it? Basketball
Court.
court.
Yeah, basketball
There it
court.
is. I'm losing my sports references, but then I was thinking about business. The amazing thing about business is there's no restriction as to who can come on that court. It's
That's
like
true.
50 people come on, or the best guy out of nowhere could come and start a business and compete with you. And it's like how raw and unlimited, and the competition in a free market is just meant to be so intense that you would think
Yeah.
about people who are successful in startups and stuff. You think it's incredible, beating the
Yeah, but I
odds.
mean, if you think it slightly differently and you think it more about the people that rise to play professional sports, right?
Mhm.
And I mean, I was far away from kind of being at the top there, right? But I kind of had a little of sniff for kind of what that means. Um, but the people that really make it to the top is, I mean, you need a bit of talent, right? Yeah, that's one thing. But then really, I mean, it's the famous saying, right? It's 10% talent and 90% hard work. And I've seen that quite a bit. So, you talk about the competition on the court, yes, but the competition really is about you moving up, to the next level. And in basketball, you want to make it to the NBA. In soccer, you want to make it to the Champions League. But that's the 0.0001% of players that start playing soccer at some stage, right? So, the determination I think you need to kind of get to that point is something where you find quite a big quite a big correlance between sports people and then being successful later in life in business as well, because you need that drive to kind of have a goal and kind of go for it.
Yeah, I mean, what you can see is that there's a process that gets you to that court. It's not like you
Yeah,
randomly got on that court. There was a huge amount, and
yeah,
it's a screening process as you're competing. It's a self-selection process because if you just find that you're not good at it, eventually you're going to give up, or you're going to be kicked out. But actually,
yeah.
I look at sports now very differently after doing this podcast. I used to think that it is a function of some kind of unique talent. You may be tall, you may be able to jump higher, run faster. Maybe your reflexes are better. So there's some unique physical talent combined with hard work. Now, I don't believe that as much. And the reason
Mm.
why is because you have to logically think about it, is that out of billions of people on the earth, are there really only this small number of people that could play at that level? So, okay, you could say there's access. Some people just they don't live near a basketball court, so they never played basketball. It's not in their sports, genre for their country, as an example. But then this is the one that I got now, I think about a lot, is that how many great, talented players got injured
Oh,
and could
100%.
never recover from their injury. And I would
100%. I mean,
argue probably have
I
a
actually,
pool.
yeah, I actually talk about this quite a bit because I mean, I've talked about 90% talent and sorry, 10% talent, 90% hard work. You've got to be able to put in the hard work, right? So, and you can only put in the hard work in sports when you're healthy, right? So, actually having a functioning body for a long period of time that allows you to put in the 5, 6, 7, 8 hours of training a day that you need to get to the peak is is kind of the foundation that you need to even have a chance, right? Because you can be as talented as you want, if you're not healthy, you'll stop progressing at some stage. And I mean the other bit I think that comes to that is where it's not just talent and hard work, is picking the right sport, right? Because and that probably translates into business a little bit as well. Is there's plenty of people that say you've got to pick what you're passionate about and kind of follow your passion. I mean, I probably describe more to the ones where you've got to follow your skills, right? So I think you've got a much better chance to be successful in sports or business if you choose something you've got a talent in, and you've got the basic foundations to be successful in that field, right? So if you're not good in math, and even if you're passionate about finance, probably not the right sport, right? So there's just stuff where it doesn't work, and it's the same in sports.
I always say that if I was to start a gym, I would have it all about reducing risk. So on the wall, I would say, here's the research on the top 5 injuries. And the highest, most common injury is a shoulder injury. Here's how it happens. Here's the mechanics of that. Here's how you avoid that. With the objective to be, we focus on reducing risk so that our customers come back.
Yeah, yeah. Good point.
But just one last thing on basketball. I wasn't a huge basketball fan, but I was a huge Michael Jordan fan when I was growing up. And uh, I'm telling you that I'm watching The Last Dance on Netflix for the 4th time now,
Yeah,
and just screaming out loud as I'm going through his journey. But I don't know if you watch that, and for the listeners and viewers,
yeah,
The Last Dance on
absolutely.
Netflix, it's just, to me, the best documentary I think I've ever watched.
Yeah, no, it is amazing. There's another one on Netflix about coaches and how some of the top coaches in sports uh, kind of what's the philosophy and kind of how they get their teams to be top performers. And one of them is about Doc Rivers, which was he was coaching Boston for a long period of time. He was a player at Boston for a long period of time. And very successful coach. And he was coaching the Lakers at that time, I think. And just and how he talks about and kind of what was important for the team and kind of how they wanted to present themselves. Yes, some amazing lessons in that.
What was
So
the name of
if
that?
you want to, it is called. I'd have to look it up. It
Right.
escaped my name. But if you look for Doc Rivers on Netflix,
Okay.
it'll come up.
Okay. Got it. Um, why don't I put that in the show notes for the listeners out there and
Perfect.
this too? Um, okay. Well, now it's time to share your worst investment ever. And since no one goes into their worst investment thinking it will be, tell us a bit about the circumstances leading up to it, then tell us your story.
Perfect. So, I mean, I've been tossing and turning last night, kind of which one I'm going to pick because, I've been, like I said, I've been involved in startups now for 20 years. When you play the startup game, it's a bit of from an investment perspective, it's obviously a bit of a numbers game. It's very, very unlikely you're going to invest in one startup and kind of hit the jackpot. It happens, but it's most likely pure luck. You've got to accept that you lose more than you win, right? And so when I think about kind of my losses, I kind of put them in three different buckets, and I'm going to pick kind of one bucket to tell you a little bit more about that, but just to give you a bit of an idea. One is just bucket of bad decisions, right? So those are the ones where I kind of knew something was wrong with the investment that I'm making, but and I didn't trust my gut feel, but it was really about greed or something else taking over, or fear of missing out that kind of took over, and I kind of still made that decisions. And so those ones financially were normally the ones where I lost money quick, because it just didn't work. And so those are the ones I'm most frustrated about, essentially, because I knew something was wrong about it from the beginning, but I didn't follow my gut feel. The other one, second basket, is the ones where I was actually ready to make an investment. I did all the work on it, but I then found an excuse not to make them. And so I've got a couple of those. And again, from a financial perspective, I obviously didn't lose money, right? But I lost huge upside on a couple of those deals. And I'm not talking about, should have bought Apple in 2010 or something like that, right? I'm talking about businesses where I've done the DD, I've worked with the founders. I had a term sheet on the table. I wanted to invest money, and I just had to put my signature on it. And then I found an excuse not to do it. And those excuses could have been cash flow at that time was a bit tight, and I thought maybe I wait a little bit. But those are the ones where I probably lost the biggest potential upside. And one of those businesses was easily a 200 times upside I would have had on that business, and I didn't make it. Now, hindsight's easy, right? So you can't really dwell on those things. I only dwell on the ones where I'm like, why didn't you make that decision? And so I'm kind of trying to push myself more and more on those decisions to kind of get to the point where I'm like, if you feel this is a good investment, you've got to find a way to make it. If you've done the work, right? These are not gut feel decisions. But then last one, and I'll tell a little bit more about this, is the ones where not just lost money kind of financially, but also time, right? And so that's obviously a huge factor because you've got a very limited amount of time in your life. And so losing money on one side, yep, that's painful. But if you spend a lot of time on something as well, you've got to make a call at some stage on when it is too much, right? And so the one that comes to mind for me, there's we started a company. We saw a big opportunity in the real estate space, and we saw a couple of companies doing this around the world as well, and it was all around kind of improving and making the process of purchasing the next property easier, right? So think about, you've got a property, you want to buy a new property. It's a whole process that you've got to go through, right? So you've got to find a new property, you've got to find a way to finance that new property. Do you sell your old property first, or do you buy first? Kind of all decisions you've got to make. You've got to find financing for that. Do you need bridge financing and so forth? So it's a whole lot of process. It's a whole lot of angst that goes with that, and a lot of people are very scared about that process, and sometimes get it wrong. And so what we looked at is kind of, is there a better way to get you from property A into property B, right? And so we spent a lot of time on that. We had great partners here in Australia, some of the biggest real estate companies in Australia kind of backing us as well. And at the beginning, it kind of was working, right? So we found some customers where it was working for. We found we transacted, I think, total of 42 properties or so. But it was a tough time in Australia for the market in terms of real estate, right? I mean, if you know anything about the Australian real estate market, normally just does that, goes up, 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 up. The whole government is pretty much set up to support that. And me as a German, I had a very hard time to get my head around this when I came here, because I thought property was very expensive when I came to Australia. But since then, it has kind of gone up nothing but 2 years where it kind of went down. Now, one of the years where it went down, we started this company. And so we ran into a whole lot of issues. And the main issues I think we ran into is, one was timing, right? So market was going down, which meant we were buying properties. We were trying to improve them and then sell them in a very short period of time. But obviously, if the market's going down, you're kind of trying to buy it here and then sell it here. Now, you've got to give the seller a good price for it, because they're not going to give it to you unless you give them a decent price. But you've got to be very careful with kind of knowing that when you're going to sell it, the market potentially has dropped even more, right? So we ran into the problem of not being aggressive enough on the buying side, so we couldn't get the properties. But if we were aggressive enough on the buying side, we might have overpaid, because then we didn't get the money back on the sell side. Now, we kind of managed even that process fairly well, and we made money on, I think 60 or 70% of our properties, but we had a couple that really killed us. Where the just market dropped more than we thought. We couldn't sell them for a period of time. Holding costs were higher, and so forth. So we were like thinking, okay, we get through this process, right? And the market's going to get better. And then once the market turns, it might get better for us, right? So we kind of sat through it. We learned a lot about the stuff and learned a lot about the assumptions that we had about the market as well. But we didn't really look close enough, right? Because it was a bit masked, on kind of what the market was doing. And we thought the market's going to save us on the other end. So anyway, we kind of went through this. We got a bigger debt facility, and we came out, and the market kept dropping, right? And so we were like, okay, market's not turning as quickly as we thought. What do we do now? So next thing was that we kind of look closer into the numbers, look closer into the unit economics and kind of what has been working. And we kind of figured out, wait a second, this model is actually working really well in Spain, some of the companies we talked to in Spain, Italy, Turkey, and so forth. But then we realized there's some big change, but some big differences in those markets. Because at the beginning, we were like, great, it's working there. It's just the market slightly different here. So we've got to wait it out. But then kind of when we look closer and closer and closer, figured out that there were actually differences in the market. So, real estate agent here in Australia is about 2% on average. Real estate agent in Spain is about 6-7%. Italy is about 6-7%. Property values lower, right? But you already have a built-in, much bigger built-in margin now if you consume that real estate margin, in terms of the loss than here in Australia where we had 2%, right? And so that was different. And then the other thing that's very different is Australia is actually one of the most sophisticated markets when it comes to finance, and financing your property. And it's one of the smoothest in terms of transitioning from one property to the next, right? So it's much easier to get bridge loan here. It's much easier to get financing for your new property. You can get a mortgage here in 2 days, no problems. Like even same day sometimes you can get that done, right? So those hurdles in Spain, Italy, and Turkey much higher, right? So again, another reason on kind of why it doesn't work here. And so kind of more and more we kind of looked into it. We were like, shit, we're fighting an uphill battle here, right? And so we were kind of at the point where we were like, okay, we nearly had a bigger debt facility because we thought we've got to go bigger, we've got to go national, we've got to have more volumes through the business to kind of make it work. And then COVID hit, right? And so now COVID obviously changed the dynamics completely. The debt facility providers pulled back. not providing us the facility. And we kind of still tried to save it for probably a month or two and kind of trying to figure out, could we change it? Could we change the business model and so forth? But our real estate partners turned around and said, look, we don't know what's going to happen, because at the beginning of COVID, everyone was like, shit, this could be, the drop in real estate value that we've never seen in Australia. We've got to figure this out first. Now, it turned out to be the completely other way around, and properties doubled in the next kind of 18 months, which is also crazy. But, we had all these things against us then. And finally there, we kind of made the call on, wait a second, we stepped back and kind of looked at everything from the outside, and we're like, we actually got the model wrong. Right? And so I think the issues that we ran into there were that we were probably looking, and I like this. I kind of like looking at different models around the world and see what's working and learn from that and kind of make it work here. But I think what we didn't appreciate in that time was the differences the market had, and thinking that we can overcome it by just the market turning and getting that timing right, and the timing never was right. So it was not just from a financial, because I put money into the business, obviously trying to make this work, but also from a timing perspective. I spent a good 3 years of my life on it, on trying to get this to work, where we probably should have, after 9 to 12 months, kind of looked at it and gone like, shit, there's something wrong. We've got to change the model to actually make it work for Australia.
Can you remember the day that you guys decided, all right, it's over?
Yeah. So, I mean, really the day was when lockdowns happened in Australia, right? Like, because before that we were like, the other anecdote on this is kind of Paws, which is the business I'm running at the moment, which we started, a couple of years before that, or 5-6 years before COVID. I still remember the board meetings where we were like, yeah, COVID's going to be fine. It'll be a month or two of kind of slowed down travel and so forth, but we'll be good. 2 weeks later, we were sitting in the same room, and our revenue was down 90%. And at the same time, we were looking at the real estate business going like, okay, this is not going to happen.
What a challenging time. I mean, for people in the future, when they look back, they won't really understand how bizarre it really was, So how would you describe the lessons that you learned, if you put it into 1, 2, 3 or something like that?
Yeah, so I think that the real lesson I learned there was that what works in A doesn't work in B, right? So I mean, fundamentally I knew that from the beginning, right? But I think I underestimated the changes that the different markets can have, and the dynamics that come out of that, particularly for kind of a high asset business. For retail, if you do something in the US, you've got a high chance works in Australia, right? If you do something online retail, you do a product or something like that, there's a high chance it works. For something like real estate, where you're talking, I mean, it's a biggest asset class for people, right, that they normally own in their lives. And the dynamics of that market, very different between US, Europe, and here, right? And we didn't appreciate that at the beginning. And I think that's something that we kind of picked up there to, if we look at these kind of models, to go deeper into saying like, yep, if it works in Europe or US, what are the differences between those different markets? What's the different dynamics? And what are the risks if we kind of trying to do something similar here?
Maybe I'll share a few takeaways from that. I was just taking notes as you were talking, and I wrote down a bunch of stuff. But first thing is, timing matters. But you can never really know whether your timing's right until after. So my best friend and I, Dale, started our coffee business in Thailand in 1995. And so we set up our factory, everything was good. And then 1997, Asian financial crisis happened, and then boom, all the revenue was gone. And we were in darkness for 2 or 3 years. And it's only that for different reasons we were able to survive that. One of the reasons was because we thought it's just coffee. I mean, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're not trying to bring some tech solution that nobody knows about. And also, just determination that, it was just, we wanted to do it. But so the second thing is, so I wrote down good idea, wrong time. Simple,
Yeah,
good idea, wrong
yeah,
time. Now, the
yeah,
second thing I wrote down was just transferring a business model doesn't always work. So even in our case with coffee, we were like, okay, this is simple. In America, offices have pots of coffee, and you brew a pot of coffee. So we went to America and we bought secondhand brewers. We shipped a container to Thailand and said, that's it. We're gonna refurbish these brewers, which we knew how to do really easily and cheaply. So we're gonna, 15 bucks it's gonna take us to get this machine onto the desk or onto the counter in the lunchroom. Of course, what we didn't realize was that Thais didn't drink brewed coffee. They either drank
that's a problem.
instant or latte, espresso type, but they never went through the brewed coffee phase. So silly us, we should have seen it, but we didn't see it. Then there was the complication. There's 100% tax on imported coffee. We didn't really understand the implications of that until we started getting tangled up in that. So all of a
Yeah,
sudden, all of these, what should be a pretty simple business transferred from America to Thailand became very complicated. So that's where
yeah,
the lesson about transferring a business model doesn't always work. The other one I wrote down was you're going to be on a roller coaster no matter what. And it's really a matter of making it through, holding on through the times. Now, I was just, thinking that that's, what business is all about. And eventually you let go if you just realize that I'm not going to survive the next turns, right?
yeah.
And that brought
And
me,
it's, I mean, that's a hard decision sometimes, right? Because
it's
the you've
impossible.
got to you've got to find the right balance between holding on, because it's always going to be hard, right? And you've got to always going to come home at some stage and go like, oh, what the f, like, what am I doing here? This, and if you hold on, sometimes you get out on the other side and it's perfect, and sometimes it's not, right? And so, like, how many of those cycles do you have to get through to kind of get out on the other side? And when do you kind of make the call and saying like, no, wait a second, I've spent 3 years on it, but it's not going to happen. It's a, like, you constantly have those thoughts, and unfortunately there's no magic, silver bullet that tells you kind of when to do it. And I often have those discussions with entrepreneurs as well, whether I invested in them or just kind of try and help out, is kind of where they are at that point and going like, should I keep doing this or not? Like, it's a really, really tough decision.
Yeah, I agree. There just is no correct answer, for, whether to hang on and go through the next turn or whether to say, no, this is never going to stabilize, then therefore I got to get off. But it made me think about the last thing I was thinking about, and that is timing really matters in the sense that on the one hand, if you were facing a rising market when you started, it's possible that you could have made enough profit to figure things out as you went along. But because
Yeah,
you started in a potential, in a down market or a tough time, it kind of forced the reality of these problems up to the surface that would have been covered possibly by a rising market. And that
100%.
brings me to one of the lessons in one of the podcasts that I learned was the lesson that, uh, you know, I think it was like big companies die slowly because they have a lot of cash and it's not
Yeah,
revealed. And so on the one hand, you could say, well, bad timing in this case because things went down, but you could also say no, good timing because it revealed something that we realized we didn't see, and it became pretty clear we weren't going to be able to resolve that in a profitable way that was going to lead to. So even when you could say, oh, bad timing, no, maybe good timing.
yeah. No, and I think like that's what I said. I struggled last night as well and kind of figuring out what was the my worst investment. Because I mean, A, you've got a lot of learnings from it, right? And B, uh, some of those learnings I've used now for some of the other businesses that we're running. Um, so, and then like I said at the beginning, this startup game is obviously a numbers game as well, right? You can't expect to start every single one and it's going to be, or invest in every single one and it's going to be 100% success. So, and like you said, I think that the time with COVID, good and bad, like the good thing is that it gave us the realization of like, okay, this is not going to happen now, and we've got to stop this now because there's no way for us to change it. The bad thing is, on the other side, you could look at it and go like, okay, if it wouldn't have been for COVID, we might have gotten the debt facility, and we would have had a chance to turn around and pivot it into something else that works, right? But I mean, I think the one lesson out of that for me is as well that you just can't have regrets in this game, right? You've got to take the good and the bad. I have this discussion with my wife from time to time where she's very different to me. She's not a risk taker. She questions me on a daily basis on why the F I'm doing what I'm doing, and why don't I get a stable job and all that stuff. Now, in tongue in cheek, obviously, I think she secretly enjoys it that I'm doing this, but it's if you accept that that's what you're doing, you've got to accept also there's going to be some bad outcomes as well, and then you've just got to take the good of it and not dwell in it, right? Because otherwise you'd be doomed.
Well, let her listen to this story, and then you can find out whether she's secretly enjoying it or not.
Yeah, exactly.
This discussion. There is great research done in the field of finance and investing, where they analyze the long-term performance of male versus female fund managers. And they found that females outperform, and they attributed it to their perspective of risk. The males were much more aggressive and willing to take risk, whereas the females were more risk averse, and therefore their actions with their portfolios were different. And
Yeah.
in the long run, in the field of investing, it really is not losing.
100%.
So
Yeah, and I
that
think, I mean, that's also like, I think that equation changes significantly over your life as well, right? Because when I started doing startups, I was like end 20s. I started my first companies. Didn't really matter, and I kind of kept telling this to myself as well. It's like, if I do this and if I try to make something happen, build a company, now is the easiest time to do it. Doesn't mean you can't do it when you're older, but the implications are different, right? Like, I didn't have kids, didn't have a mortgage, I could still find a good job if I needed to, if it didn't work out. So the implications of that were quite simple for me, right? It's kind of, I saw an opportunity there. There was a big payout if it works. The downside of it wasn't that big, right? Now, that equation, I think, changes over life, right? So once you get into, marriage, house, kids, stuff like that, obviously, the obligations that you have and kind of keeping your family safe and well, very different. And even for me, kind of, it's not like I'm taking the same risks that I took 10 years ago or 15 years ago, right? I mean, these things change. Your portfolio changes, the cash that you have to invest changes. So, it's very different kind of how I look at investing now than I looked at it, 15 years ago.
I have a debate with a friend of mine, and he's really, really into startups. And, his argument is, a pretty common argument, which is make your mistakes while you're young. This is your chance. My argument is do not make your mistakes when you're young. And my point is the power of compounding is enormous when you're a 20-year-old. You got to go to 60, you got 40 years. Part of the reason why Warren Buffett is a saint in the world of investing is because 2 years in the 70s, he made over 100% return. And he allowed that to compound over 50 years. If he had not made those 2 years of more than 100% return, he would have just been another excellent fund manager.
Yeah.
And so there's a balance there. Now, let me ask you,
Yeah.
based on what you've learned and what you continue to learn, what's one action that you'd recommend our listeners take to avoid suffering the same fate?
Good question. So I think for me, and again, it's interesting on how you look at it, right? I'm kind of thinking there is also a time of, if you and I was thinking, I read something about this the other day, but I don't remember the book now. But anyway, what I was always thinking about this in response to what you just said, around not making mistakes early, right? It's also, there is a it's a very different scenario, because people talk about starting to save early, compounding interest over a long period of time. Now, Warren Buffett is it's a very simple example, but I think it's also a very outlier example. But the reality is, for most people, when they're in the 20, 25, 26s, right, when they just come out of work, if you make like $60,000 and save 10 grand of that and put that away and double compound it, or you take some risk at that time and make a much higher return over the next 2 or 3 years, the amount it sets you back, because the base of what you start is so small, is actually not that big, right? Even on compound matters. And so I think you've got to find the right balance there on kind of what do you want to do, because it's perfect. There's different people, and there's different, there's not one single strategy that works for everyone, right? Because if my wife would have done what I'm doing, she would have been probably she would have been very unhappy, to put it lightly, over her lifetime. Where if I would have done what she's done, I would have been very unhappy, right? Which is like, get a bigger job early. I could have started it, when I started my first company in Australia, I had a job with Google lined up, very well paid, nice signing bonus and all this stuff. I still don't think I would have been where I am now, because I decided to take the risk and say no to that job and start my first company, right? So unfortunately, I don't think there's a single truth and a single strategy that kind of works for everyone. But I think what you have to do is kind of sit down and think about it and go like, what is it actually I want to achieve, and what's the most likely scenario for me to get there, right? Because money is one thing, right? And yes, we all want kind of money, cool. But there's a high value also to doing the stuff that kind of gives you some kind of non-monetary benefit, right?
Yeah.
And that is just, I talked about at the beginning, kind of, you want to do something that you're good at, right? And not just follow your passion, right? And I kind of subscribe to that. But at the same time, you don't want to do something that makes you miserable either, right? So you've got to strike that balance there to get to the point where you have a financial result that works for you, but also something that works for you from a pure life enjoyment perspective.
Strike a balance. All right.
Yeah.
So what's a resource, either of yours or a book or something that's helped you, that you'd recommend for our listeners?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things, and I'm always terrible with names, but if we think about books, what I really enjoyed reading was Atomic Habits.
Yes, by
I
James
don't
Clear.
remember actually, but James Clear, that's right. Just because it gave me a bit more perspective around kind of how can you structure your life, and what's the stuff you should be working on. How can you stack some of those habits to make things easier? And actually, when I heard about it, I was like, oh shit, this is why in that stage of my life things were actually easy, because I was doing X, Y, Z, right? So you kind of find a couple of really nice nuggets in there. I think that helped me. The other one I really liked was is what's it called? The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. Mark Manson, I think, wrote it. Similar kind of to kind of how I live my life. Again, kind of, I think that kind of theory works really well for me, on not dwelling on some of the stuff that really doesn't matter, and kind of trying to focus and really find the stuff that matters. I think he talks in his book around, life's always going to be some suffering, right? That's like bottom line. Like, forget about Instagram, right? All looks nice and shiny for some people, but guarantee every single one has their fucking issues. Now find an issue, find something where you can at least enjoy it the most, right? Is the important part. So I think those books I really enjoyed. I've read them a couple of times. And then podcasts, for example, I try to listen to a lot of podcasts, different ones, because I don't want to hear just one angle. I think that's a big problem in our lives these days, that people just listen to one source. And so I'm trying to read and listen to all kinds of different stuff. One I like around the kind of retail world, online retail, is Limited Supply. Limited Supply is a podcast it goes really deep around online retail marketing and everything that comes with it. It's one of the few I thought they don't just touch on stuff kind of on the surface, but kind of really go deep.
Interesting. Okay, I've got that, and I'll put it in the show notes. Limited Supply. That's Nick and Moez.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. And in fact, Atomic Habits, I've actually written a course on it, which I'm going to include in the show notes for people that want to
Cool.
check it out, because I write courses on books that I enjoy, and I've got about 50 or 60 books that I've written courses on. And so
Yeah, nice.
I just thought to myself, hey, I should be talking about those book courses on this podcast, you know? There's an
There you go.
idea. It took me a little while to get there, but yes, that's a good one. All right, last question.
Perfect.
What's your number one goal for the next 12 months?
So, I mean, I'm still running one of our companies that we started. It's a listed company now called Paws. So I think the key focus for me is kind of getting that business to a better position. And I think, it's one of those things where the business is actually doing really well. We've done a lot of work over the last, particularly kind of 3-4 years to get it to this point. Market hasn't quite appreciated it. Small caps in Australia are a bit undervalued at the moment and unloved, but we know that's going to change. So I think we've got a huge opportunity for that business, kind of pushing that forward and positioning that even better than we are now. And so I think that's going to be a big focus for me from operations perspective. And on the other side, I think I mentioned it, or you've mentioned it in my bio, is kind of cash flow businesses. So from an investing perspective, I think there's a huge opportunity in cash flow businesses, just from a good generational perspective and so forth. So that's something that I'm looking at from an investment perspective to get a bit of an idea on kind of how we can benefit from that.
One of my prior guests from India said, cash is not king. Cash flow is king. And I love that.
Yeah.
It's cash
That's
flow
right.
that creates the cash. So, well, listeners, there you have it. Another story of loss to keep you winning. Remember, I'm on a mission to help 1 million people reduce risk in their lives. As we conclude, Justus, I want to thank you again for joining our mission. And on behalf of A Stotts Academy, I hereby award you alumni status for turning your worst investment ever into your best teaching moment. Do you have any parting words for the audience?
Oh, just, even though you're all about avoiding risk, I say you've got to take some risk, but make sure you measure it as much as you can.
Yeah, it's a great point. In fact, I'm not about avoiding it. I'm about reducing it.
Reducing it. That's right.
So that's a wrap on another great story to help us create, grow, and protect our wealth. Fellow risk takers, let's celebrate that today we added one more person to our mission to help 1 million people reduce risk in their lives. This is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stott, saying, I'll see you on the upside.